Mom, we sold the furniture. We needed money for our Paris trip. Enjoy the space. That sentence was the very first thing I saw, taped crookedly on my living room wall, when I pushed my front door open that afternoon. No greeting, no explanation, no warning. Just a ripped piece of notebook paper and a message cold enough to make my hands tremble. I read it once, then twice. By the third time, the words were no longer words. They were a blade. I took one slow step into my house, and every footstep echoed like I had just walked into a church after everyone else had left. My home, the place I had built with 30 years of working night shifts, raising children alone, counting pennies in grocery aisles, now felt like a hollow shell. There was no couch, no coffee table, no side lamp with the little floral shade I'd had since my husband passed. Even the rug, my soft blue rug, was gone. The air looked bigger somehow. Too big, and I suddenly felt smaller than ever. I remember blinking, as if my eyes were tricking me, as if the room would refill itself if I simply adjusted my angle. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. Every piece of furniture in my home, my chairs, my dresser, my bed, was gone. Vanished. Sold. Without my permission. Without even a phone call. I reached for the wall to steady myself. The paint felt cold. My fingers brushed across where the picture frames used to hang. My family photos, my wedding photo, pictures of my son as a boy. There were faint rectangles of cleaner paint in the exact spots where joy used to live. My voice cracked before I even spoke. "What did you do?" But of course no one answered. It was strange standing there, an older woman in her mid-60s, in a house that suddenly looked like it belonged to a stranger. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the only sound left. The hum felt mocking, like even the appliances knew what happened before I did. I looked down and realized something small but painful. The little indentation on the floor where my coffee table legs used to rest was still there, a perfect outline of what used to be, a reminder that even when things disappear, their absence leaves marks. I picked up the note again, my hand trembling. We needed money for our Paris trip. Paris. Not groceries, not bills, not a medical emergency, a vacation. After everything I'd given them, after the years I spent making sure my son never felt the absence of a father, after helping him through college, co-signing loans, babysitting his child, cooking dinners when he and his wife came over too tired to lift a finger, after paying the down payment for the very house they were planning to return to after their romantic European escape. Paris. My breath shook. A deep, quiet kind of hurt spread through my chest. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. Heavy the way loneliness sits at the edge of a bed that's suddenly too big for one person. I walked toward my bedroom, though I already sensed what I'd find, or what I wouldn't. The room was empty. No bed frame, no mattress, no dresser, no mirror, no curtains. Just a bare window letting in a slice of late afternoon light that made the emptiness look even harsher. My knees nearly gave out, so I sat on the floor, the wooden planks pressing against my hips. I could feel every small knot in the wood, every grain line, things I never noticed when my bed was still there. Funny how you become intimate with the floor only when your whole world is taken away. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath, one that trembled halfway through. How did I get here? How did I raise a son who could walk into my home and strip it bare like a stranger repossessing property? And then something even more chilling hit me. They didn't even hide it. They didn't sneak. They didn't feel guilty. They left a note. As if emptying out my home was an Amazon delivery, I whispered into the quiet, "Why wasn't I enough for you to respect me?" But even as the question left my lips, I knew the truth. I had taught them, slowly, quietly, over many years, that I would tolerate everything, every little disrespect, every assumption that I would always give, always sacrifice, always bend. They didn't become this selfish overnight. I trained them, unintentionally, by never saying no, Sitting on that bare floor with sunlight cutting across the empty room like a sharp line, something inside me cracked, but not in a way that broke me. It cracked open, the way a seed splits before it grows. I wasn't done. I wasn't helpless. And I sure wasn't going to be the woman left sitting in an empty house waiting for people who only remembered me when they needed money. No, not anymore. As the house echoed with a quiet that didn't feel like home anymore, I wiped my face, sat up straighter, and breathed in deeply. The hurt was still there, but underneath it, something firmer had taken root. Resolve, dignity, a decision. This was the day I stopped giving away pieces of myself, and it was the day my son learned that even the softest mothers can stand up when pushed into emptiness. I kept reading that note on my living room wall like the words might suddenly rearrange themselves into something kinder, but no matter how many times I looked, it still said the same thing. Mom, we sold the furniture. We needed money for our Paris trip. Enjoy the space. I stood there, holding the flimsy piece of paper between my fingers, and for a moment, my mind just emptied out. The room was so quiet it felt as though the whole world was holding its breath, watching me figure out the truth at a painfully slow pace. It was the kind of silence that presses on your chest, heavy, suffocating, merciless. I walked deeper into the house like someone wandering into a crime scene. Every step made a hollow sound. Every sound reminded me that nothing, absolutely nothing, was left. The shelves I'd dusted every Sunday morning, gone. The armchair where I used to read my Bible at night, gone. The table where I'd served countless Thanksgiving dinners, gone. The TV my late husband and I bought together before he passed, gone. Even the small stool in the corner, the one I kept to sit on while tying my shoes, gone. I felt like a ghost drifting through the life I used to have. My hands instinctively reached for where the couch arm should have been. I'd touched that fabric for years, sitting with my grandson, watching cartoons, but my fingers met the cold air instead. And that moment, that empty touch, felt like betrayal in its purest form. Because it wasn't just furniture that disappeared. It was comfort, memories, the sense of belonging, the sense of home. When I stepped into the kitchen, I half expected to find at least one chair. Just one. But the kitchen looked like a rental property shown to potential buyers. Clean, cold, bare. The only thing left was the little magnet shaped like a sunflower stuck on the fridge. A small, cheap thing I'd bought at a gas station years ago. Everything of value was gone. What remained was the useless, the sentimental, things that couldn't be sold. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. My tongue felt heavy. I whispered into the emptiness, "Why would you do this to me? Why?" My voice bounced off the walls, mocking me with my own pain. A breeze slipped through the slightly open back window, the only window they hadn't bothered to lock. It moved through the empty room, stirring up bits of dust that danced in the afternoon light. That single current of air felt like someone exhaling disappointment, my disappointment, at myself, at them, at the years I'd spent sacrificing without ever demanding respect in return. I walked into my bedroom, but I already knew what I would find, or what I wouldn't. The image hit me like a blow. The indentation in the carpet where my bed used to rest. They'd taken everything. Bed, drawers, nightstand, jewelry box, even the old lamp with the cracked shade. They didn't even leave me a blanket on the floor. I froze, unable to move for nearly a full minute. How do you process something like this? How do you absorb the fact that your own child, your flesh and blood, treated your home like a yard sale while you were out getting blood pressure medication? I slowly lowered myself onto the floor because there was nowhere else to sit. The wood pressed hard against my body. I leaned against the bare wall, closed my eyes, and let myself feel it. Every ounce of hurt, betrayal, confusion, disbelief. I didn't fight it, not anymore. And then, like a cruel twist, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a photo from my son's wife, a story posted online. There they were, smiling, clinking glasses at an airport lounge, ready for their romantic trip to Paris. In the background was a luxury store bag, Chanel, something I know neither of them could ever afford. Not without help, my help. I stared at their smiling faces until they blurred. She wrote in the caption, "Starting our dream trip. So excited for everything ahead. Not a thank you, not a message checking in on me, not even a thought. Just joy built on the foundation of my loss." As I watched their video replay over and over, something inside me finally cracked. But it wasn't the kind of crack that makes you crumble. It was the kind that lets light in. Because right there, sitting on the cold, empty floor with my back against a wall that suddenly felt foreign, a truth washed over me. This wasn't the first time they'd taken advantage of me, just the boldest, the loudest, the most humiliating. And if I didn't do something, if I didn't stop them now, it wouldn't be the last. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater. My tears felt warm against the cool air of the stripped room. I could still hear the faint humming of the refrigerator, the only surviving witness. Then I exhaled, long, steady, like I was releasing years of swallowed pain. "Enough," I whispered. One word, small but powerful. Because that was the moment my story shifted, the moment the woman they thought was weak stood up. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, spiritually, inside. That empty house didn't break me. It woke me up. When I sat in that empty house, the walls surrounding me felt heavier than ever, not because they were bare, but because they remembered everything I had given long before my son decided to strip the place down. And as I leaned back against that cold bedroom wall, my mind began replaying a decade's worth of sacrifices. Things I never asked to be thanked for, things I did because I believed love meant showing up, even when no one noticed. I remembered the first time my son moved back in with me after losing his job 8 years ago. He walked through my door with 2 duffel bags, a tired face, and a defeated posture. I didn't hesitate. I cooked him dinner, offered him his old room, and told him, "Baby, this house is still your home." I meant it back then, and I thought he felt grateful when he hugged me that night. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, and slowly the desperation in his eyes shifted into a kind of entitlement I didn't know how to name at the time. I used my pension savings to help him pay off his student loans when interest rates spiked. I sold my old Honda, the only car I'd ever bought brand new, just so he could have money for a certification course that he swore would change everything. It didn't. But I told him it was okay. I always told him it was okay, even when it wasn't. When he married his wife, I paid for nearly half the wedding because they couldn't afford the venue deposit. I remember standing in that church hall, watching the pastor bless their future, hoping that maybe this marriage would ground him and give him purpose. Little did I know it would be the beginning of a long, quiet shift where my generosity became their expectation. I cooked for them every Sunday, buying groceries with my own money because they said they were saving up. I babysat my grandson 3, 4, sometimes 5 nights a week because they needed date nights, work nights, mental health nights. The excuses changed, but the pattern didn't. They brought laundry to my place because the laundromat is too far. They left dishes, clothes, toys, responsibilities, everything, because they knew I'd pick them up. I thought I was helping them build a stable life. Instead, I was slowly teaching them that my time, energy, and money were simply part of their lifestyle. There was one winter I will never forget. A cold snap hit the city, pipes burst across the neighborhood, and their heating system broke. I let them and my grandson stay with me for almost 3 months. I gave up my bedroom for the baby, slept on the couch, and made hot meals every night while they sprawled across my living room like it belonged to them. When the repair bill came in, over $2,000, they looked at me with hopeful eyes, the same hopeful eyes my son had when he was a little boy asking for ice cream, and I said yes. I paid it, without hesitation. I told myself I was doing what any mother would do. But looking back, I see the truth. They never once asked if I could afford it. They only asked if I would. Over the years, I watched the small things disappear. My savings, my comfort, my boundaries. They weren't stolen the way my furniture was. They were eroded little by little, softened by every, "Mom, can you help us?" and "Mom, we just need a little more time." And I always said yes because in my mind, saying no felt like failing as a parent. When they finally moved into their own home, I helped with the down payment. I bought appliances. I bought baby furniture. I bought things they didn't even ask for, just trying to make their life easier than mine ever was. That's what we do, isn't it? We try to make sure our children don't have to struggle the way we did. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to teach them gratitude. I realized something bitter while sitting on the floor of my empty bedroom. I had mistaken exploitation for family responsibility. I confused their dependence with closeness. I misread their silence as appreciation. And I ignored the small signs, the way my daughter-in-law rolled her eyes whenever I offered advice, the way my son sighed whenever I set a limit, the way they spoke about me in the tone people use for obligations rather than loved ones. I brushed it all aside because I didn't want to admit that my own child might be using me. And yet what hurt the most wasn't the money I lost or the years of support I had poured into them. It was remembering all the times I bent over backward to give them comfort, only for them to repay me by emptying my home and flying across the world with the money they made off my belongings. That thought settled in my chest like a stone. This wasn't a moment of desperation for them. It was a choice, a selfish, calculated choice. As the memories swirled, I felt something shift inside me, not a breaking, but a slow, painful understanding. I had given so much of myself that they genuinely believed it was their right to take more, and that realization burned deeper than any empty room could. It was the moment I finally admitted to myself that love without boundaries isn't love. It's sacrifice mistaken for duty, devotion mistaken for debt they never intend to repay. I sat there a long time, breathing through the heaviness, letting the truth settle in, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: anger. Not the loud, explosive kind. No, this was a quiet, steady flame, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that signals change. And as I stood up from the floor, brushing dust off my palms, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. The woman who spent years giving everything had finally reached the end of what she was willing to lose. That night, after the sun slipped behind the rooftops and the house grew dim, the emptiness felt different. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, spiritual, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. The bare floor pressed cold against my legs as I sat alone in the center of what used to be my living room, and for the first time in my 65 years, I felt like a stranger inside my own life. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see the room clearly because the shadows softened the truth. In the daylight, I could pretend I was processing it, but at night, there was no pretending. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket soaked in ice water. Every breath echoed. Every shift of my weight sounded like a breaking memory. I kept looking at the dent in the floor where my coffee table had been. I had polished that table twice a week for more than 20 years. I used to place warm cornbread on it for my grandson, set my tea on it while watching old reruns, put my feet up after long days of work. Now it was just an outline, like a chalk trace around a body at a crime scene, and the crime was me. My kindness, my trust, my belief that love from a child was unconditional. As the hours passed, the temperature dropped, and the house felt colder than usual. Without curtains, the moonlight poured harshly through the windows, casting long white streaks across the empty floorboards. It reminded me of hospital lights, bright, unforgiving, revealing too much. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to find some warmth in the room, but there wasn't any. Not in the walls, not in the air, not in me. I reached for my phone at one point, thought about calling someone, but who? My sister lived 2 states away and had her own problems. My church friends were kind, but I didn't want anyone seeing me like this, sitting on the floor of an empty house as if I had collapsed under the weight of my life. I didn't want pity. I didn't want well-meaning questions. I didn't want someone telling me, "You should have said no years ago." I already knew that. Around midnight, the house creaked as it settled, making me flinch every time. At 65, you'd think you'd be used to being alone. But this wasn't being alone. This was being abandoned. There's a difference, a loud one, and I felt it in every breath I took. I closed my eyes and let the darkness settle over me. In that still moment, memories came, not the good ones, but the ones I'd pushed aside for years. I saw myself working double shifts, exhausted and limping, still coming home to cook for my son. I saw the months after my husband passed, when grief wrapped itself around me like smoke, and I stayed strong because my son needed me. I saw the times he yelled at me as a teenager, and I told myself, he's just growing. I saw the times he made choices that hurt me, and I told myself, he doesn't mean it. I saw the ways I excused him, protected him, fought for him, even when he didn't deserve it. And now he had repaid all of that by stripping away the last place I had left to feel safe. At some point, emotion swelled so sharply in my chest that I couldn't hold it back anymore. I pressed my hands to my face and cried, quietly at first, then harder, until my breath came in trembling waves. I cried for the years I spent giving without receiving. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who believed love would eventually be returned. I cried for the home that no longer felt like mine. And most of all, I cried because I finally understood something I had tried not to admit. My son didn't value me. Not really, not beyond what I could give him. My tears slowed eventually, leaving my face tight and warm. I stared ahead at the blank wall, my eyes swollen, and whispered to myself, how did I let it get this far? There was no answer, only the sound of my own breath bouncing back at me from the empty room. And then came the thought that hurt the most. I had been the one holding the door open for every disappointment that walked into my life. I had mistaken poor boundaries for love, and love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-erasure. Around 2 a.m, I pushed myself up from the floor and sat with my back against the wall, staring out the window at the streetlights. Somewhere outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping across the walls, briefly illuminating the room. In that split second of brightness, I saw my reflection in the window. Tired, yes, but also something else, something firmer, something awakening. Pain has a way of clearing things, like wiping a fogged-up mirror. And in that clarity, a single thought rose inside me with a strength I didn't expect. Enough. That one word carried every ounce of exhaustion, every shard of heartbreak, every boundary I'd failed to set. It also carried something new, the beginning of resolve. I stayed awake until dawn, not because I couldn't sleep, but because something inside me was shifting. Quietly, slowly, like a tide turning. The sky outside changed from black to blue to pale gold, and as the first streaks of morning light filled the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A sense of direction, a sense that this moment, this floor, this hurt, this night was not the end. It was the breaking point I had needed, the one that would lead to a beginning. When the sun finally rose, I stood up on stiff legs, wiped my face with trembling hands, and looked around my empty house one more time. The emptiness still hurt, but now it whispered something different. It whispered possibility, and with that, I whispered back, "This will never happen again." The morning light crawled into the empty house like it was gently checking on me, making sure I had survived the night. And in a way, I had. I stood there barefoot on the wooden floor, stiff from hours of sitting and thinking, but clearer than I'd felt in years. Something inside me, something quiet but strong, had shifted during those dark hours. It wasn't anger anymore, not the messy kind. It was a clean, sharp realization that if I didn't protect what little I had left, I wouldn't have anything at all. And that thought alone was enough to move my feet. I took a shower with water that felt colder than usual, maybe because the house had lost the warmth of the furniture that used to hold it together. I dressed slowly, carefully, choosing clothes like someone preparing for battle, even though the world would see it as just another Tuesday. My reflection in the mirror, propped awkwardly against the wall because the dresser was gone, looked older than I remembered, but also steadier. There was no shaking in my hands, no hesitation in my eyes, just certainty. A calm, heavy certainty. The first place I went was the bank. I walked in through the glass doors with a steady pace, the air conditioning sweeping over me with that familiar, sterile chill. The teller, a young woman with bright eyes and braids neatly tied back, greeted me with a polite, "Good morning." I nodded, but my voice came out colder than I intended when I said, "I need to make some changes to my accounts." She guided me to a desk, and as I sat down, the chair cushioned my back in a way that felt almost shocking after the hardness of my bare floor at home. I explained what I needed: remove my son's access to my checking account, cancel the automatic transfers I'd set up for him every month, and update all my security information. She listened without judgment, her fingers tapping across the keyboard quickly. But she paused, hesitated for just a second, and asked gently, "Are you sure you want to remove him completely, ma'am?" That question could have broken me on any other day. It could have sent me spiraling into guilt or shame, second-guessing myself like I always did. But not today. Today, the memory of my son's handwriting on that crumpled note, "Mom, we sold the furniture," was more than enough to steady my resolve. I didn't need to think. I didn't need time. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Yes, I am completely sure." She nodded, almost like she could feel the weight behind my words, and continued typing. When she finished, she slid a stack of papers toward me: agreement forms, confirmation pages, printed statements. My signature flowed across each line, each stroke of the pen, feeling like a piece of my life being reclaimed. For years, I had given money without being asked, given permission without being consulted, given trust without being respected. But as I signed those papers, I felt something return to me: my control, my voice, my place in my own life. When everything was completed, she handed me a folder with my new account details. "You're all set, ma'am. Your son no longer has access to your funds," she said quietly, like she understood the enormity of it. I thanked her and walked out, the glass doors opening with a soft hiss that sounded almost like an exhale. Outside, the air felt lighter, and I realized it was me who felt lighter. I had been carrying invisible weight for so long that I forgot what it felt like to walk without it. My next stop was my phone carrier. I changed the shared family plan so I was no longer paying for lines that weren't mine. The representative tried to ask if I wanted to reconsider. I didn't. Then I went to the utility company and removed my name from bills connected to their house. I visited the credit card office and froze the cards he once used only in emergencies. It took hours, forms, signatures, patient explanations, but every moment felt like stitching up a wound that had been open far too long. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted but clear. My son called then, 3 back-to-back calls, each one vibrating my phone in my purse like a persistent warning. I didn't answer. The 4th call came with a voicemail notification. I played it outside, standing in the weak January sunlight. His voice filled the air, sharp and irritated. "Mom, the bank said the transfer didn't go through. What's going on? We needed that. Call me back." No apology, no concern about whether I was okay. Just a complaint about losing money he thought was guaranteed. I didn't call him back. For the first time in my life, I let silence answer for me. When the 5th call came, I finally picked up. Not because he deserved it, but because I needed to hear how he would react. His voice rushed out, full of frustrated entitlement. "Mom, why did you cut the transfer? You know we're traveling. We planned around that money." I waited for him to finish, then said calmly, "I'm done funding your lifestyle. You're both adults. Take care of yourselves." There was a long pause, so long I could hear the faint chatter of airport announcements behind him. And then, as expected, he raised his voice. "So you're just going to ruin our trip? Seriously? After everything we've done for you?" Those words almost made me laugh. After everything they'd done for me? My voice stayed steady as I answered, "I think we've both done enough for each other. Now you handle your life, and I will handle mine." Before he could fire back, I hung up. My hand didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. I felt steady, beautifully, powerfully steady. And as I walked home, clutching the folder of new account papers against my chest, I realized something profound. This wasn't just financial separation. It was the first boundary I had set in decades. A small step, yes, but it felt like the beginning of a whole new life. The panic started sooner than I expected. It was almost funny, in a sad kind of way, how quickly the balance of power shifted the moment I stopped being their silent supply. By the time I reached my neighborhood, I already had 6 missed calls and 2 voicemails from my son. I didn't listen to any of them. I just walked home slowly, letting the winter air bite at my cheeks, reminding me I was alive, present, and finally making decisions for myself instead of for a grown man who still acted like a boy. When I reached my porch, the 7th call came, buzzing angrily in my hand. I didn't pick up. Instead, I stepped into my empty house, quiet, bare, wounded, but mine again in a way it hadn't been in years. Not even 10 minutes passed before my phone lit up with a FaceTime request. I declined it, then another, and another. Eventually, a text came through. "Mom, pick up. This is serious." I stared at that message and almost laughed. Serious? Serious was coming home to an empty house. Serious was having your furniture sold behind your back. His version of serious was losing access to money that wasn't his in the first place. I placed the phone face down on the floor beside me and let it vibrate against the hardwood like an irritated insect. Then came the messages from his wife. Long paragraphs filled with fake sweetness, layered over clear accusations. "Your sudden financial changes are causing us unnecessary stress during our trip," she wrote, as if I had ruined their honeymoon instead of them gutting my living room. "We really need you to fix this. It's not fair to us." The entitlement jumped off the screen, each sentence dripping with the assumption that I owed them stability, comfort, ease. I didn't reply. I just sat there in the middle of my silent house, letting their desperation fill the room the way their disrespect once did. By afternoon, the tone changed. The texts shifted from annoyance to guilt-tripping. My son wrote, "Mom, are you feeling okay? This behavior is really unusual for you." I read that line twice and felt something sharp twist inside me. Unusual behavior? No, it was overdue behavior, and the fact that he couldn't see the difference only proved how deeply they had grown used to exploiting me. Another message followed, "We're concerned about your mental state. You've never made decisions like this without talking to us." That one made my jaw tighten. Talking to them. About my own money? My own life? Somewhere along the line, they had convinced themselves that my adulthood had expired when theirs began. Around 4 o'clock, my phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. I knew immediately who it was. When I picked up, my son's voice came through, sharp and frustrated. "Mom, why aren't you answering your phone? We've been trying to reach you all day." I let him talk. He launched into a monologue about how they were stranded financially, how their Paris plans were falling apart, how embarrassing it was to have their cards declined. He blamed the bank, the timing, the stress of travel, everything but the truth, that they were irresponsible and had built their adult lives on the assumption that I would always catch them before they hit the ground. When he finally paused long enough for me to speak, I asked calmly, "What exactly do you want from me?" There was a beat of silence, And then he said, "Mom, just transfer the usual amount. We're counting on it. You can't just cut everything off suddenly. It's not right." Something about that sentence, "we're counting on it," settled like a stone in my stomach. They had counted on me for so long, they treated my support like a paycheck, predictable, automatic, guaranteed. My voice didn't shake when I answered, "I'm not your safety net anymore." He exhaled loudly, annoyed. "So you're really doing this? Now? While we're overseas?" The anger in his voice didn't scare me this time. It clarified things. I said, "Your trip isn't my responsibility. Your finances aren't my responsibility. Your choices aren't my responsibility." He tried to argue, but I cut him off with a sentence I had never said to him in my entire life. "I don't owe you anything." There was a stunned silence, a long moment where even the static on the line seemed to freeze. Then his tone shifted into something darker, accusatory, manipulative, the voice of someone losing control. "This isn't like you, Mom. Something's wrong. Maybe we should talk to someone when we get back. Maybe you're not thinking clearly." That sentence was meant to corner me emotionally, but it did the opposite. It liberated me, because now I could finally see the truth laid out bare. They weren't worried about my mental state. They were worried about losing access to me. I said one final sentence before ending the call. "The only thing wrong is how long I let you use me." Then I hung up. After that, the messages didn't stop, but they changed tone again, more desperate this time, more frantic. His wife wrote, "We don't have enough to cover the last part of the trip." My son wrote, "Do you really want us to be stranded?" Then came the one that nearly made me laugh out loud. "We paid extra for the Eiffel Tower dinner reservation. You're really messing things up for us." That was the moment something inside me finally clicked into place. Their panic wasn't about survival. It was about losing luxury. Late that evening, after the 15th missed call, the house fell silent again. And for the first time, that silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. A peace they could no longer take from me. The morning after their wave of frantic calls, I woke up on the thin blanket I had laid on the floor, my back aching from the hardness beneath me, but my mind surprisingly clear. It was the first time in a long while that I opened my eyes and didn't feel immediate dread or confusion. Instead, I felt a steady, grounded certainty, like the first quiet breath after a storm finally passes. The house was still empty, still echoing, but it didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a starting point, a blank page, a place where something new, something stronger could be built. But even with that new clarity, I knew I couldn't navigate the next steps alone. I had spent too many years being isolated inside the role of the giver, surrounded by people who took more than they ever offered. If I wanted to protect myself fully, I needed support, someone with knowledge, someone who could look at my situation without emotion and help me name what had been happening for years. So I picked up my phone and called the only person I knew would tell me the truth without sugarcoating it, my old friend Denise. She and I had worked together 30 years ago at the community health center. We weren't talk every week close, but she was the kind of friend who remembered who you were, not who the world had conditioned you to become. When I told her I needed to speak with her, she didn't ask a single question. She just said, "Come over." Her voice held warmth, but also a firmness that felt like stepping onto solid ground. When I arrived at her house, she opened the door before I even knocked, took one look at my face, and knew something had cracked open in my life. She hugged me. Not the gentle kind people give when they're scared to touch your pain, but the real kind, grounding, steadying, the kind that says, "You're safe now." We sat in her kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and warm bread wrapping around us, and for the first time since the whole nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe without something tightening inside my chest. I told her everything: the empty house, the note on the wall, the money transfers, the entitlement, the calls from Paris, the way they spoke to me like I was a malfunctioning machine instead of a mother. I didn't cry this time. My voice was calm, almost too calm, but every sentence felt like setting something heavy down after carrying it for far too long. Denise listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her expression soft, but her jaw tight with a seriousness that told me she was holding back her own anger on my behalf. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, folded her hands, and said a sentence that changed everything for me. What you've been experiencing has a name. It's called financial abuse. I had heard the term before, in the news or in pamphlets at the clinic, but I had never imagined it applied to me. Not from my son, not from my own family. Denise continued, "You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. They've been exploiting you for years and taking your furniture." She shook her head slowly. That wasn't desperation. That was boldness. Boldness fed by years of knowing you would never push back. Hearing those words, spoken plainly without judgment, unlocked something inside me. It was like a puzzle piece finally snapping into place. She was right, painfully right. And for the first time, I could see the pattern not through the blurry lens of motherly instinct, but through the clarity of truth. Denise didn't stop there. She picked up her phone and called her cousin, a financial advisor who specialized in elder protection laws. She explained my situation in crisp, professional terms, not painting me as a victim, but as a woman ready to reclaim her life. Her cousin, Michael, agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Before I left her house, Denise held my hand and said softly, "You're not alone anymore. You have people, you have rights, and you have options." Meeting Michael was the second turning point of the day. He didn't speak in confusing jargon or talk down to me. He treated me like a client, a capable adult, someone worthy of respect. He explained how to document everything, every message, every transfer, every call, every item sold. He showed me how to print my bank history, how to gather proof of unauthorized withdrawals, and how to protect myself legally if things escalated. Most importantly, he gave me language, terms like financial dependency, coerced support, patterned exploitation, and misuse of elder resources, words that finally put structure to the fog of confusion I had lived in. He said, "You've been giving them oxygen. You don't owe them your air anymore." Later, he helped me draft a written notice stating that all financial ties were terminated effective immediately, and that any further attempt to access my accounts without permission would be considered fraud. He told me to save it, not send it yet because the timing would matter later. That made me feel powerful in a way I hadn't felt in decades, like I finally had tools, strategies, leverage. When I returned home that evening, the house was still empty, but it no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt like a war room, a planning space, a place where a woman who had spent her whole life giving had finally taken the first steps toward giving to herself. And as I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall with my new paperwork beside me, I whispered a quiet truth to myself. I'm learning the language of freedom. The silence that followed my financial cutoff didn't last long. Manipulative people rarely stay quiet when their supply runs dry. By the second day, the tone of their messages shifted yet again, no longer pleading, angry, but strategic. I recognized the change instantly because it was the same pattern I had endured for years. When guilt didn't work, they tried fear. When fear didn't work, they tried power. And this time, their attempt came dressed in the language of legality, wrapped in a thin veil of concern so artificial it almost made me laugh. It started with an email from my son titled "Important Documents." Even before opening it, I felt that familiar tightening in my stomach, the one that used to make me go along with anything to keep the peace, but not anymore. I clicked it and scrolled slowly. Attached were several PDFs, all drafted in rushed, clumsy legal language. One was something they labeled a temporary financial authorization form. Another was a joint decision agreement. And the last one was a document giving them limited guardianship rights in case of declining mental stability. That was the moment my eyes narrowed, my breath stilled, and a slow-burning heat gathered in the center of my chest. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They wanted control, full, undeniable control over my money, my home, my autonomy, and they thought fear would make me sign it. Barely 10 minutes after the email landed, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered, expecting another frantic attempt, but instead heard a measured voice introduce herself as a representative from a family legal consultation firm my son and his wife had apparently hired. She spoke to me like I was made of fragile glass, like I was a confused elderly woman who needed guidance. She said my children were concerned about erratic decisions, that they felt I was under undue stress, and that legally formalizing support channels would be wise. I almost laughed at the script she was clearly reading from, but the anger beneath my calm rose steadily, quiet but fierce. I told her plainly, I am not signing anything, and you have no business calling me. She paused, caught off guard, then tried again with a softer tone. Mrs. Williams, your children mentioned some concerning behavior. They believe you might be struggling with cognitive changes. I cut her off mid-sentence. You tell whoever paid you that I am perfectly capable, perfectly aware, and absolutely uninterested in being managed. And then I hung up. But I knew this was only the first wave. 2 hours later, my son called through Wi-Fi from Paris, his voice dripping with carefully manufactured patience. Mom, can we please talk like adults? We're worried about you. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the empty house, no shame, just entitlement dressed in fake compassion. I kept my voice steady. You're not worried about me. You're worried about the money you lost. He snapped back instantly, the fake softness melting. Mom, you're being paranoid. We're just trying to protect the family. You can't make financial decisions alone anymore. This is why we need those documents signed. The audacity in that sentence settled over me like frost. I answered him slowly, clearly, letting each word fall like a weight. The only people harming this family are the ones who emptied my home and now want to control my life. He tried to talk over me, voice rising, but I continued. I have spoken to professionals, real ones, and they told me exactly what this is. The line went quiet, just breathing on the other end. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. He knew. By late afternoon, the next escalation arrived, this time not from them, but from the county's senior wellness office. A woman called to inform me they had received a concern report about my mental well-being. She was polite, doing her job, but I knew exactly who had filed it. The timing was too perfect. My hand tightened around the phone as she read the report, saying my children believed I was acting unpredictably, possibly being manipulated, and unable to maintain a safe environment for myself. They weaponized the systems meant to protect victims, using them against me to regain control. I took a deep breath before answering. My voice was calm, almost light. Ma'am, thank you for your concern, but someone is using your department to retaliate against me because I stopped giving them money. She hesitated, clearly not the response she expected, but I continued, explaining everything. The empty house, the stolen furniture, the financial exploitation, the sudden push for guardianship. She grew quiet, and by the time I finished, her tone had shifted completely. Mrs. Williams, you are not the one we need to worry about. Please know you are within your rights. And for the first time in 48 hours, I felt something warm flicker inside me. Validation. But the day wasn't done teaching me just how far desperation could drive entitled people. That evening, my daughter-in-law sent a long message filled with melodramatic concern. We're scared you're losing touch with reality, she wrote. You're hurting the whole family. She followed it with another PDF, this one labeled Power of Financial Support Continuity. The message ended with, please sign this so we can help you. Help me? They wanted ownership, nothing more. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded everything, every document, every message, every threat, to Michael, my advisor. He replied within minutes. "You did the right thing. Do not sign anything. They're escalating because you finally stopped enabling them. This behavior is textbook." Textbook. The word soothed something inside me. As the night settled in, the house remained empty, but I didn't feel hollow anymore. I felt centered. A woman who had finally learned to name the abuse she endured. A woman no longer confused by guilt or manipulated by false concern. A woman preparing, quietly, steadily, for the next chapter of her defense. And in that silence, I whispered to myself, if this is how hard they fight to control me, imagine how powerful I must be when I'm finally free. The next morning, sunlight crept through the bare windows and stretched across the floor like a quiet reminder that something had changed inside me. I woke up earlier than usual, not because my body was rested, but because my mind was alert, clearer than it had been in years. There was no confusion, no tug-of-war between guilt and responsibility, only direction, a firm, steady direction. I got dressed, tied a scarf around my neck, and sat down on the floor with my phone in hand, ready to begin building the one thing I had never allowed myself to believe I needed. A record, clean, organized, undeniable, of everything they had taken, everything they had done, and every attempt they were making now to regain control. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was protection. It was true. I started with the messages. Every text, every voicemail, every email. I saved them into a separate folder labeled January. I screenshotted their accusations, their guilt trips, their fake concern, and the documents they pressured me to sign. I saved the PDF attachments, renaming each one clearly. Guardianship attempt. Financial control form, threatening message. I documented the timestamps, the tone, Tanny escalation. And with each file I organized, I felt something inside me strengthen, like building a wall brick by brick, not to keep the world out, but to keep myself safe from the people I once trusted most. Next, I printed my bank statements. Michael had taught me exactly what to look for. Every suspicious withdrawal, every repeated transfer, every purchase I didn't recognize. With a red pen, I circled the charges my son had made, under the assumption that my money was his unspoken allowance. Uber rides, restaurant tabs, electronics, tickets, subscription services, things I knew he couldn't afford on his salary. I didn't feel anger as I marked each one, only clarity, the kind that grounds you when you finally stop lying to yourself. After that, I took photographs of my home. The empty living room, the hollow space where my bed used to be, the open closet with nothing but a single hanger left behind, evidence, proof. The visual kind that hits harder than words ever could. As I moved through the house, clicking pictures, the emptiness no longer felt like a violation. It felt like a document, a witness, a before and after frame of a woman reclaiming her life. Around noon, I headed to the community center, holding a folder with my printed papers tight against my chest. Denise had told me the center hosted support groups for seniors facing financial exploitation, but I had never considered myself one of those cases. Yet walking into that building, I realized how many of us carried the same quiet wounds, the same stories we whispered to nobody, the same children we had poured ourselves into, only to be drained dry. The room was warm and filled with soft chatter, chairs arranged in a circle. Mostly women, a few men, all older, all with tired eyes but brave posture. The facilitator, a calm woman with silver hair and glasses perched low, smiled at me and said, "Welcome. Sit wherever you like." I chose a seat near the window, the winter sunlight falling gently across my lap. One by one, people introduced themselves and shared pieces of their stories. A woman whose daughter had taken her car and never returned it. A man whose son opened credit cards in his name. a grandmother whose niece drained her savings under the promise of helping with bills. Their stories were different in detail but identical in pattern, and for the first time I didn't feel ashamed. I felt understood, seen, supported. When it was my turn to speak, the room quieted. I took a breath, steady and long, and began telling them everything. How my furniture disappeared, how my son and his wife treated me like an ATM, how they filed a false wellness concern to push for guardianship. As I spoke, heads nodded in recognition, compassion softening every face around me. No one judged. No one questioned my sanity. They knew. They had lived their own versions of it. When I finished, the facilitator leaned forward, her voice firm and kind. What you are facing is intentional. It is patterned, and it is not your fault. But you are doing everything right, documenting, seeking help, building allies. She handed me a pamphlet with resources for legal support, financial counseling, and protective services specifically for older adults. She said, "What you've started is a boundary, and boundaries are not walls. They are doors you get to lock." After the meeting, several women came to hug me. One of them, Miss Clara, squeezed my hands gently and murmured, "Honey, you've got more strength than you realize. They're panicking because you finally closed the faucet." Another woman whispered, "Don't feel guilty for saving yourself. They don't feel guilty for draining you." The truth in their words settled deep into me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was finally stepping out of the role they built around me, a role that kept me small, quiet, and compliant. When I returned home later that afternoon, I placed the new pamphlets next to my growing folder of documentation. I stepped back and looked at the pile, small but powerful, and felt something bloom inside my chest. Resolve. Yes, but also connection. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I had a community behind me. I knew I had language, and I had proof. The house was still empty. The walls are still bare. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since before all of this began. Hope. The confrontation didn't happen quietly. People who rely on manipulation rarely face you in private. They prefer witnesses, an audience they can sway, a room they think they control. And that's exactly why I chose the setting carefully. When my son and his wife returned from Paris, angry, embarrassed, financially bruised, my phone lit up with a message from him that carried the tone of a command rather than a request. "We need to talk, family meeting, tonight at Aunt Carol's." I almost smiled. They thought they were setting the stage. They thought they were summoning me. But what they didn't know was that I had spent days preparing, gathering documents, learning my rights, building support. They were walking into a room they believed belonged to them, but it didn't. Not anymore. Aunt Carol's house was warm, crowded, filled with relatives who didn't know the truth but could sense tension thick in the air. I stepped inside with my folder tucked under my arm, my posture steady, my heart beating slowly, like it had practiced for this moment. My son and his wife were already there, standing by the dining table like hosts at a banquet. She wore an expression of manufactured concern, the kind that falls apart under real scrutiny. He looked restless, pacing slightly, glancing at the door as if expecting reinforcements. When he saw me, his expression flickered. Surprise first, then something sharper, the realization that I looked too calm for his version of the story to make sense. "Mom," he began, stepping toward me with a sigh rehearsed for sympathy. "We're really worried about you. We've gathered everyone here because we want to help you understand." I lifted my hand lightly, stopping him mid-sentence. My voice remained level. "If we're going to talk, we're going to talk honestly." That single sentence shifted the energy in the room. Conversations quieted, chairs scraped softly, people leaned in. His wife crossed her arms tightly, the first crack in her composure. He gave a strained laugh. "Mom, come on, this isn't how we do things. We're trying to support." I opened my folder slowly, deliberately, like someone unwrapping truth. "Then let's start with support," I said. "Here are the bank statements showing money withdrawn without my permission. Here are the automatic transfers you both depended on as if they were your salary. Here are the purchases for your trip made on my account. And here," I tapped the screen of my phone, "are the messages and documents you sent trying to gain legal control of my finances." A sharp murmur rippled through the room. Eyes widened. Some hands shot to mouths. His wife took a quick step back, her face draining of color. My son reached out as if he could physically block the truth. "This is out of context," he insisted. "We were just trying to help you after you started acting strange. You made decisions that were—" "Strange?" I cut in, my tone cool but steady. "You mean decisions that benefited me instead of you? Decisions you couldn't control?" His jaw tightened, and he glanced around the room, searching desperately for someone to side with him. But the room had gone still. Everyone was watching intently, waiting for the next truth to land. I pulled out the next set of papers, laying them gently on the table. "Here are the photos of my stripped house, my empty living room, my missing bed. You sold my belongings while I was gone. You took everything I had in that home and left me on the floor, and then you boarded a plane to Paris." A gasp traveled across the room like a wave. My son's wife shook her head frantically. "We didn't leave you on the floor. We thought she'd buy new furniture. We needed the money for the trip we'd been planning." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "You needed the money," I said evenly. "So you took it. Not because I offered, not because I agreed, not because I was incapable, but because you expected it." My son stepped closer, his voice rising despite the room watching. "We were desperate. You don't understand how stressful things have been for us. We thought you'd help like you always do. You owe us that after everything you put us through growing up." The entire room shifted at once. Every head snapped toward him. Even he seemed startled by his own words. But I didn't flinch. I simply lifted the final piece of paper, the letter drafted with Michael's guidance. "This," I said quietly, "is an official notice that all financial ties are terminated. I have documented every transaction, every attempt to pressure me, every fabricated concern report you filed about my mental health." His face drained at those words. He hadn't expected me to know. "You will not access my accounts again. You will not claim guardianship. You will not speak for me. You will not manage me. And if you try, there will be legal consequences." Silence weighed heavily on the room, thick, unmoving. His wife sputtered something about misunderstandings, but no one was listening anymore. My son stared at me, breathing heavily, his anger collapsing into disbelief. "Mom, you're choosing them over your own family." I took a breath, steady and unshaking. "I'm choosing myself, and for the first time, that's enough." Around me, relatives slowly nodded, not at him, but at me. Some placed gentle hands on my shoulder, silent gestures of solidarity. Others glared at him with disappointment. Truth had shifted the room completely. As I gathered my folder and turned toward the door, a strange peace settled in my chest. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't punishment. It was reclamation. And I walked out of that house, knowing he could no longer take anything else from me, because I finally knew how to protect what was mine. In the days following that confrontation at Aunt Carol's house, the consequences began unfolding faster than even I expected. Not because I wished anything bad upon them, but because the truth has a way of stripping away comfort from those who depend on lies to feel secure. When people build their lives on another person's sacrifice, the moment that sacrifice stops, the entire structure starts to crack. And that's exactly what happened. The first sign came 3 days after the meeting. My son arrived at my doorstep, not with humility, not with remorse, but with the frantic, scattered energy of someone whose comfort had been abruptly taken away. He knocked too hard, too fast, like urgency could rewrite the past. I opened the door only halfway. His eyes were puffy, his hair unkempt, his clothes wrinkled in a way that told me he hadn't been sleeping well. "Mom," he started, voice tight and thin, "we're having some issues, just temporary. We'll handle it, but—" He hesitated, swallowed, looked down like a child caught in a lie. "We need help." The words landed in the air between us, and for the first time in his life, he said them without entitlement, just fear. But fear is not the same as change, and I had learned that lesson too late to fall for it again. I kept my voice steady. "What kind of issues?" I asked, not because I planned to fix them, but because I wanted to hear him name the consequences of his own choices. He ran his hand through his hair. "Well, the credit card company froze our account because the payment stopped. And the landlord," he paused again, "is threatening eviction. The bank says the withdrawal attempts flagged our account for review. We can't access certain funds right now. The Paris trip maxed out what we had." He rubbed the back of his neck. "We didn't realize how much we were relying on you until everything stopped." That sentence, spoken so plainly, contained more truth than anything he'd said in years. They relied on me, not because they couldn't survive without me, but because I had made their survival too easy. They never learned to stand because I had been holding them upright. But now, without me supporting their weight, they were wobbling under the pressure of their own choices. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't soften my words. I simply said, "This is what happens when you spend money you don't have and disrespect the people who help you." He flinched, as if the reality in my voice stung more than he expected. He tried again, softer this time. "Mom, we're family. Families help each other." I let out a slow breath. "Families also respect each other, and you didn't." His eyes clouded with something. Shame, maybe, but also frustration at finally being held accountable. "So you're just going to let us lose everything?" he asked. I answered without harshness, only truth. "You're not losing everything. You're losing access to what you were never entitled to. There's a difference." A few days later, his wife called me, her voice trembling but edged with bitterness. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't acknowledge the empty house or the pain they caused. Instead, she launched into a list of their problems: the overdue rent, the loan denial, the declined card at the grocery store, the panic setting in as late fees piled up. Her voice cracked only once, and it wasn't from guilt. It was from fear of losing the lifestyle they had enjoyed at my expense. She ended with, "You've really made things difficult for us." I replied, "No, I simply stopped making things easier." There was a long stretch of silence, the kind that reveals more honesty than any words could. Then she whispered something so small I almost missed it. "We didn't think it would go this far." The truth was, they hadn't thought at all. Meanwhile, relatives who had witnessed the confrontation began distancing themselves from my son and his wife. People talk, people notice, and when you humiliate your own mother for a vacation, trust begins to rot at the edges. Invitations stopped coming their way, neighbors avoided them. Even at church, people who used to greet them with smiles now offered stiff nods. They had tarnished their own reputation, not because of what I revealed, but because of what they did. Consequences don't need amplifying when the truth is loud enough. The most telling moment came a week later when I saw my son walking down the street alone, shoulders slumped, holding a stack of envelopes, bills, notices, demands. He didn't see me watching from my window. For the first time, he looked like an adult facing the real world instead of a child living under the illusion that someone else would handle the fallout of his choices. And a small, unexpected part of me felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was learning. As for their marriage, I heard through a cousin that the tension between them had grown thick. Money stress will do that, especially when the foundation was built on using someone else's generosity as a financial cushion. Arguments about blame, responsibility, budget, what we should have done, they were happening daily now. I didn't celebrate their struggles, but I accepted them as the natural outcome of years spent building a life on entitlement. Their downfall wasn't dramatic. No explosions, no screaming fights spilling into the street, just the slow, steady unraveling of comfort they had never earned. And as their luxury crumbled, the trips, the dinners, the upgrades, the phone plans, the subscriptions, they were left face to face with the reality they had long avoided, the life they could actually afford, not the life I funded. By the end of that month, something inside me settled gently, the way dust falls after a long storm. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt free. Because for the first time in decades, the consequences were no longer mine to carry. They were theirs. And that, more than anything, was the true beginning of my healing. As the weeks rolled into months, something inside me began to shift with a quiet, steady rhythm, like the slow opening of a window after a long winter. My house was still empty for a while, but emptiness no longer felt like loss. It felt like possibility. It felt like space I finally owned, literally and emotionally. And once I had fully accepted that nothing in that house had abandoned me, I had simply cleared out everything that didn't respect me, my life began to bloom in ways I never imagined at 65. The first step in my new beginning was selling the house. I know people often say you should never leave the place your memories live, but I learned that homes don't hold memories. People do. And the people who once filled those rooms had long ago stopped treating me like someone whose presence mattered. So when I walked through the house one final time, taking in the echo of my footsteps, I didn't cry. I didn't clutch the door frame or look back longingly. I felt light, almost buoyant, as if I were finally stepping out of a shadow that had followed me for years. I used the money to buy myself a small, cozy apartment on the 3rd floor of a quiet building near the city park. It wasn't big, but it was filled with sunlight, and every window looked out over tall trees that swayed gently whenever the wind passed through. The first night I slept there, on a brand new mattress I chose myself, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in decades. No noise of arguments, no tension in the walls, no weight of unspoken expectations. Just me, a soft lamp glowing in the corner, and the promise of a life that belonged solely to me. I bought furniture slowly, not rushed, not pressured, not obligated. I picked colors I loved, not colors I thought would match the family. A soft cream sofa, a round walnut table, a warm rug in shades of burnt orange and deep brown that reminded me of autumn sunsets. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building a home for myself, not for someone else to take comfort in. And each item I brought into that apartment felt like an affirmation. I deserve this. I deserve comfort. I deserve beauty. I deserve a life that is mine. But the biggest change wasn't the apartment. It was me. I realized that somewhere inside the woman who had been hurt, drained, and used for years, there had always been someone strong, just waiting, quietly for permission to breathe again. And once I gave that version of myself room, she flourished. I started taking long morning walks in the park. At first, it was just to clear my head, but soon it became a ritual I cherished. The crisp air, the crunch of leaves under my shoes, the way sunlight filtered through the branches. It reminded me that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives slowly, in gentle waves, like breath returning to a body that had been holding it for far too long. I joined a senior art class at the community center. I had never painted before, but something about holding a brush in my hand made me feel both powerful and delicate, like I was learning to express emotions I had stored in the corners of my heart for decades. Some days I painted bold colors, reds, blues, golds, colors that felt alive. Other days I painted soft strokes, quiet landscapes that reflected the peace I was slowly reclaiming. And the best part wasn't the art, it was the laughter in that classroom, the companionship, the way other seniors shared their own stories of struggle and resilience. For once, I wasn't carrying pain alone. I also started volunteering at a program for older adults who had experienced financial abuse. The first time I walked into that support group, not as a woman seeking help, but as someone ready to stand beside others, I felt a sense of purpose. I didn't know I was missing. I listened to their stories, offered advice, shared resources, and sometimes just held their hands when the truth became too heavy for them to say out loud. And in every face I looked into, I saw pieces of myself, women who had given too much, men who had been taken advantage of, seniors who had been made to feel small in their own families. Helping them didn't fill the empty places in my life. It expanded my capacity to create something new. One afternoon, after leading a small workshop about financial boundaries, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, "You make me feel like I'm not foolish for loving too much." I hugged her gently and whispered, "Loving too much isn't foolish. Letting people take advantage of it is, and we're learning not to do that anymore." Her smile told me she understood, and in that moment I realized something profound. My pain had become my purpose, not in a way that trapped me in the past, but in a way that allowed me to transform it. 6 months after leaving my old home, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sun dip low behind the trees. The sky glowed in shades of copper and peach, and a warm breeze brushed against my skin. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, and felt no pain, no guilt, no regret. Just gratitude. I wasn't the woman who slept on the floor of an empty house anymore. I wasn't the mother begging for respect from children who refused to give it. I wasn't a victim of exploitation. I was a woman reborn, steady, peaceful, whole. And as the sun finally disappeared, leaving behind a soft wash of twilight, I whispered to myself, "This is my life now, and I choose me." As the seasons changed and my new life settled into a steady rhythm, I found myself reflecting on everything I had walked through, not as a woman broken by betrayal, but as someone who had finally stepped into the truth of her own worth. There is something powerful that happens when you reclaim your life after years of giving it away. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, like the gentle closing of a door that should have been shut long ago. It's steady, like a heartbeat returning to its rightful pace. And one day, standing in the soft glow of my apartment, I realized I had reached a point where the past no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a teacher. A hard one, yes, but a necessary one. I sat at my small kitchen table, my table chosen with my own hands, and watched steam rise from my tea. The simplicity of that moment struck me harder than any confrontation ever had. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice without limits. I believed family meant giving even when I had nothing left to give. I believed motherhood meant carrying burdens that did not belong to me. But the truth, learned through pain and emptiness and eventual clarity, was this: love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. And the moment I stopped surrendering, the moment I started choosing myself, everything changed. I whispered a sentence aloud, not for anyone else to hear, but to cement it inside me. At 65 years old, I understand that peace is not something given. It is something claimed. Those words felt like they settled into my bones, into the places that had once been hollowed out by exhaustion. Because peace isn't a gift from others. It's a decision you make for yourself, one boundary at a time. People sometimes think strength looks like shouting, fighting, proving a point. But my strength came in a different form. It came in the steady refusal to be used. It came in the quiet decision to walk away. It came in the ability to let the consequences fall on the people who earned them. I didn't destroy anyone's life. I simply stopped allowing them to destroy mine. And here's the truth I want anyone listening to understand. You don't owe people access to you just because they share your blood. You don't owe them your money, your time, your comfort, or your sanity. You don't owe them explanations for why you choose yourself. And you are never, at any age, too old to take your life back. I learned that at 65. Someone else might learn it at 45 or 72, but the lesson is the same. Your worth is not measured by what you give to others. It is measured by how fiercely you protect the parts of yourself that can't be replaced. Looking out at the trees from my balcony one evening, I thought about all the people who live their lives swallowing their pain, believing they are the only ones carrying unspoken scars from their own families. I wish I could sit across from each one of them, take their hands and tell them the truth I had to learn the hardest way. You are not alone. You are not foolish. And you do not deserve to be drained for the comfort of others. There are communities, resources, people who will stand with you when you decide to stand up for yourself. And most importantly, there is a version of you, quiet but strong, waiting to be chosen. I learned something else too. Freedom doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence, the kind that fills a room after you set a boundary. Sometimes it comes with people walking away. Sometimes it comes with losing relationships that were only held together by your willingness to sacrifice yourself. But losing what harms you is not a loss. It is released. So here is my final truth, my declaration, my promise to myself and to anyone listening. I will never again apologize for choosing peace. I will never again shrink so others can stand taller. I will never again confuse being needed with being valued. And as I said those words quietly into the fading light of the evening, I felt a sense of wholeness settling into me, like a soft blanket finally being draped over cold shoulders. Now I turn this question to you, the person listening, watching, sitting somewhere with your own silent stories tucked behind your ribs. Have you ever given so much of yourself that you forgot who you were without the giving? Have you ever stayed quiet because you feared being called ungrateful or dramatic or disloyal? Have you ever carried someone else's weight so long that you couldn't feel your own feet on the ground anymore? If so, I want you to ask yourself, with gentleness, with courage, how much of your life still belongs to you? And if the answer is not enough, then maybe today is your beginning. Share your story if you're ready. Speak it out loud or whisper it privately. But let it surface. Because healing only starts when truth is no longer buried. And if any part of my journey has touched something inside you, then hold on to that feeling. Don't let it slip away. Let it be the spark for your own freedom. And as you leave the video today, just remember, choosing yourself is not selfish, it is sacred. As I sit here now in a home built from my own strength, with walls that no longer echo the pain of the past but hold only the sound of my peace, I realize just how far I've come. I didn't just reclaim my belongings or my finances, I reclaimed myself. And if my story has shown you anything, I hope it's this. It is never too late to draw a line, to step out of the shadows, to decide that your heart and your life are worth protecting. You can lose things, you can even lose people, but you should never lose yourself. If you're carrying a burden that feels too heavy to name, if you've been giving until you feel empty, if someone has made you believe that your worth depends on what you provide, I want you to pause and breathe. You deserve kindness. You deserve respect. You deserve rest. And yes, you deserve boundaries. They are not walls meant to shut others out. They are doors that remind everyone, including yourself, that your peace matters. Thank you for listening to my journey, for giving your time, your attention, and your heart. If anything in my story resonated with you, don't let it fade. Take one small step toward your own healing, whether it's speaking up, reaching out for help, or simply reminding yourself that your life belongs to you. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of this story touched you the most? Have you ever had to choose peace over obligation? Share your story below. I read every comment. And if you want more journeys like this, more truth, more healing, more strength, Make sure to subscribe, share, and join this growing community. We're not alone anymore. Because choosing yourself, choosing peace, it isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning.